Hi, everyone. Sorry for our delay this afternoon or this morning, depending on where you are. But we want to welcome everyone to the Working Student Success Network's Bundling and Sequencing webinar series. As many of you already know, my name is LaShondra Thornton, and I am the Associate Director of WSSN, and I am really pleased to welcome you all to the second webinar of our three-part webinar series on bundling and sequencing. In our first webinar, as you may recall, we focused on defining intentional bundling, including the rationale of the integrated service delivery model and how it has been used to increase student success. Today's webinar, however, will build upon that and focus on how we map and document a sequence of integrated services that will ensure students have consistent access to each element of designated bundles. Like our first webinar, Jenna Bryant and Abby Parcell from NDC will walk us through our second webinar. And lastly, before I hand it over to Jenna and Abby, if you have any questions, please place them in the chat/question box that's on the right hand of your screen. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jenna and Abby.
All right, hello everyone. This is Abby Parcell, and I'm joined by my colleague Jenna Bryant. And hello. We are both from MDC, working with Achieving the Dream on the Working Student Success Network. And just for those of you that may not have joined us on the last webinar, I'm going to give a quick background on MDC, a little recap of our first webinar, and then turn it over to Jenna for our discussion today of sequencing and student flows. So a little bit about MDC. We are a nonprofit based in Durham, North Carolina, focused on the South and primarily, but working over the last 50 years to help communities and organizations demonstrate solutions and implement those to help separate and end barriers that separate people from opportunity. So we've worked with community colleges and workforce partners over the course of that 50-year history, and in particular as one of the founding partners of Achieving the Dream and an early partner with the Annie E. Casey Foundation as they built the Working Family Success Network, which was a precursor to the Working Student Success Network that we are happy to be a part of today. So as we advance to the next slide, I'll give you a bit of a background on what bundling is, just if there's anybody joining us today who's new to the integrated services delivery model. So in the WSSN, we are focused on linking three key services: education and training, financial literacy and knowledge, and income and work supports, to ensure that students are able to stay in school and make the progress that they need to complete what they came to school to do. And integrating those services is a way to reinforce supports for students. And we talk about those intentional bundles as a way of linking a set of services in a seamless manner so that each one builds on the next and they get a comprehensive set of supports. Bundling is a core element of the ISD strategy, and if we go to the next slide, you'll see some of the key ways that can happen. We talked about last time program design, so thinking about those three strands separately and sort of helping students navigate them simply by the way they are structured. You can have staffing, a person who provides multiple services across those three bundles. And there are a lot of WSSN institutions that use technology in order to support and the bundling process. So making sure that we're tracking students as they access those different services and helping them know which one comes next. That's a way of managing referrals and access to ensure that they get everything that they need in the bundle. One thing that we've seen in both studies of Working Families Success Network and our community colleges is that bundling services together does indeed improve outcomes for participants. Those that receive the services, and in one study it was shown that those that receive the services in this manner were 3 to 4 times more likely to achieve a major economic outcome like getting out of debt, purchasing a car, or completing a training or education program. And the similar kinds of success has been seen in another documentation study of some early community college participants in this effort, where colleges who were bundling these services had retention rates that were 14% higher than their college-wide retention rate. So just wanted to give you a reminder of what bundling is and why it's important. And now I'm going to turn it over to Jenna to talk a little bit more about the importance of the sequence of what goes into that bundle. So it's not just a matter of saying a student gets all of these services, but it's important to think about at which point your student accesses those and in what order, so that you're certain that they are reinforcing one another and helping them achieve the desired outcome.
So thank you. As we move to the next slide, I just wanted to say we recognize that you all have done your initial student flow as part of your implementation plan. And for those who are new to the ISD strategy, just to give you a little bit background of why we do this is because it helps visually depict how a student matriculates through a series of services or a service bundle. One good way to think about it, I think, is through our partners at LISC, and they like to say that clients should feel that they're part of one comprehensive effort. And we stressed this in the last webinar, that students shouldn't really feel like they're accessing different separate programs in different locations, and that having a clear and consistent student flow helps set the appropriate expectations for students and the staff that's serving them at the beginning. So if we take a look at the simplified student flow, and I realize it's very simplified, where the blue is for employment, the green is for income, and then the financial education and asset building pieces are in orange. So if you think about during the first week of school that a student shows up for orientation, I figure we'll call this student John, and John completes an intake form to identify his needs and services. And then he receives his financial aid package, which of course helps with his tuition and maybe some living expenses, but we know that that may not go very far. At this time, he is also screened for public benefits, and either through an academic course or through a standalone series of workshops that are offered by the college or through a partner, he receives financial literacy to understand financial concepts. So financial concepts like debt, credit scores, and how they affect his life choices, and compound interest and saving strategies. The thing about it is his introduction to those financial terms and concepts will better prepare him for his coaching, meetings, career coaching, and financial coaching. So while meeting with his career coach, John happens to mention that he's looking for a new job. So the career coach sets him up with someone who can help him with his resume and interview prep. So you'll see the offshoot line going to the resume workshop. And then a few weeks later, when he meets with the financial coach, assuming it's a different person, it could be the same person, because you could be bundling through staffing. He also happens to mention that his car happened to break down and that his utility bill is past due and his lights are about to be turned off. So the coach will help him apply for emergency cash assistance and construct a budget, because he's now starting to receive the income from his public benefit screening, and budget any leftover financial aid he has for the current paycheck. The financial coach will probably also refer him to a credit workshop that they're having at the school, which happens to incentivize attendance with a $20 Visa gift card. So, and on the onset, it's helpful if John has an idea of the process that he may go through and then some of the additional services that he could possibly receive during this. So we can move to the next slide. So like Abby said, the sequence in which John receives these services is very important, because if you look at the top, received financial coaching before having a basic understanding of financial concepts or constructing a budget when he doesn't actually have any money, that's not very helpful. And that's probably true for a lot of students, is that you can teach budgeting, but until you actually have more than a few dollars in your checking account, you're really not, budgeting doesn't mean anything. So, and then doing all that before actually screening him for public benefits. I mean, it's kind of like when people ask us to have meetings and phone calls without actually achieving something substantive. It's annoying. So, and it can actually reduce the chances of John coming back, or student engagement and his belief in the program. So, but thinking about how John experienced a few setbacks during his student flow, how he matriculated through the system of services, one thing to note is that he didn't start out in crisis. And so while he had those unexpected costs and issues along the way, he wasn't like some of the students that we see that are coming to you really trying to figure out how they can make it for the next night or over the weekend, because they may not have food or they may be homeless. So while your initial student flows offered a routine sequence of services, those services may not work out for somebody that, like I said, has utility bill issues, childcare issues, or suffering a health crisis up front, and that's why they come to see you. Many of students, let's face it, especially now, are not routine in their needs. So on the next slide, we talk about service bundles for students in crisis really need to focus on stabilizing the crisis before anything else can be accomplished. A student that's struggling to feed his kids cannot fully be present to learn and may drop out, so he can work more hours to put food on the table. Or if somebody is suffering mental health issues or crisis and they can't afford their medication, it's really hard to be fully engaged and present in school and to retain in school. So like all of us, the basic 3 H's, hunger, homelessness, and health, have to be dealt with before an intake form can even be filled out and before longer-term services can be deployed. Then you can focus on helping students receive additional services around financial literacy education, budgeting, the information that they need to then move forward for practical application of those services through coaching, career coaching and financial coaching. So for somebody, on the next slide, we'll look at what a student flow would look like for somebody in crisis. So again, it's getting that emergency cash assistance, then the intake to understand additional needs and services that they might not even be thinking about because they're so focused on that immediate need that they have to deal with to make it through the next day, the next weekend, or the next month. And then public benefit screening, because again, a lot of the work is thinking about getting people income and work support. So that public benefit screening, hopefully if they're eligible for those public benefits, that provides extra cash in their pocket. Then the education piece, in this case we have used financial literacy as the education, and then practical application where you're applying career coaching and financial coaching and to some of the financial literacy or what they learn in their student success course around budgeting and credit. The idea is that you can have your routine student flows, but as students are coming to you in crisis, to start thinking about what additional student flows you need and how you talk to staff about those flows and the services for helping to alleviate students in crisis. So I want to leave you with something before we move to our discussion. So if you look at the next slide, there's a quote from one of our partners that says, "Enforce your flow. We have reasoning to our service flow and we rarely make exceptions. The reason behind that is that if we truly believe that all the services are important to long-term stability, then we should stand behind that and ensure our student flow is adhered to." Again, this is about communication and relationship building. So if everyone's on page about the student flow, then that enhances the student engagement and relationship as you're helping students persist through school, enter employment, and achieve financial stability. So I'm going to pause here and we'll take some questions, clarifying questions, and then Abby's going to lead us through a facilitated discussion about how you guys see your bundling and service strategies. So any questions? And just to remind you guys, I think LaShondra said if you have questions, feel free to enter them in the chat. Okay, well, then we will we'll ask for Tran to advance, I think, 2 slides.
All right, so we're hoping that we've got some folks on the line today who have gone through this process as they've thought about how their students access these different services and how they get the right sequence and foundation for them. We know that your flowcharts look a lot more complicated than the ones here in our presentation today, since you've got to think about when students are going to the registrar's office and when they're getting to the financial aid office, and how they first make that contact with these kinds of integrated services delivery is a key part of where they start on that pathway. So one question that we've got for those that are with us today who have done this is, should colleges new to implementation of integrated services delivery consider when they're designing their student flow? Or in other words, what do you wish you had known before you built your first bundle for the Working Student Success Network? All right, we have a question from one of our participants, Rochelle Thompson, who poses this question about the starting point for a student. So she's asking, if you have a student flow that doesn't operate out of a single location, how do you identify the most appropriate places for referrals to be made? I think just as an initial response to that, I would say, again, this is a key part of what Jenna was talking about as far as clear lines of communication and making sure that all of those separate locations on campus know the same protocol. So, for example, you may not have somebody coming to the same, the no wrong door policy, essentially, that as long as there is standard messaging and materials, no matter which door the student goes in, they will get the same information about referrals. So you might have a flow chart in a sense that a student never sees and would never be aware that they were a part of it, but your different departments would know where they fit in that intake line, even if there are multiple places where a student might do that intake. I think that's a great example of where technology has been really key for many institutions, where they've been able to share case notes or that sort of thing, so that anybody that's interacting with a student knows what they've been told, who they've met with, etc.
And in the case of external partners, again, your student flow is outlining the services, and even though the partners may not be at the college, but understanding how a student can access those, it's important. But those partners, the services that they're actually providing can be on the student flow. It doesn't even have to say that it's from the partner. The idea is it's like a flow chart, right? When you're looking at a system of computers and IT services, it might not say that that part of the work is going to another campus or another place in the organization that's not the central, but the process is still outlined in a flow chart. So there was a question about technology that programs use and what's recommended. We don't actually make recommendations, but we can talk a little bit about what programs are used. Some colleges use additional modules in their student databases to help manage case notes. And some colleges use that have partners that are using technology or software packages like efforts to outcomes that they can share across organizations, with some people being able to see more than others because of privacy issues. But for the most part, you can see at least if somebody was referred somewhere that they received that services and some of the outcomes from that service. The other technology piece that we've seen is that there are some technologies that are just focused on referrals to help people with the referral process, so that there's a warm handoff, and again, they can see how those referrals are made. And I can't remember the name of that one, but I can follow up.
And if there's anybody on the call today that could share what technology you use, or if you've built it into your student information system, you could share that either by speaking up or by putting it in the chat box. So another piece to think about is how you assess your service bundles. So, while there's preliminary research and our documentation study that we did with some community colleges did show some retention benefits. What's really important is to find out which sequence and bundle of services works best for the needs that your students are facing. And it's important to track, do we get different results if students are receiving these two services but not a third, or do they absolutely have to have one of these things but these other two don't seem to make a difference? So kind of trying to get a sense of what students are taking advantage of and what effect it's having. That's another place where the technology piece is really critical, in being able to track what students participated in, what services they received, with what frequency. And I know we have a lot of colleges that are doing that, that began doing that really manually in some ways, just as they were getting started, to get a sense of where they're at. We have other colleges that have done student surveys using the intake form, kind of turning that into a survey question to get a sense of what students say they need and to ensure that what they're providing meets those needs.
Also, just asking students how they experience the services is often helpful. And I know one way that that colleges do this for other programs and services is using the text messaging service, where you can text message multiple people throughout the campus, because let's face it, a lot of them are not checking their college emails, but they will check a text message. And after a service is complete, or a couple of services are completed, that you can just ask a couple of follow-up questions about how they experienced the services and maybe what they would do differently or what they didn't like. Even that basic qualitative feedback is helpful in thinking about how you structure the services within your bundle.
So is there anyone with us today that has used either student interviews, surveys, or technology to assess how their integrated services, what difference those are making for their students?
And if you want to type it into the chat box, we're happy to read it out for you.
All right, well, we will move on to our final question, which is about service bundles for students in crisis. So Jenna talked a little bit about this in her presentation, and it's the important piece of that you've got to enforce the flow, right? You've got to have a protocol that everyone knows about and knows where and how resources are meant to flow, and then you've got to have a system in place for when students need something more immediate than that. And we've seen this in a lot of different ways. I think the expansion of food pantries on campus is just one example of seeing an immediate need that had pretty significant effect on students' ability to stay week to week in a semester and stay focused on their studies. So I think that that's a good example. There are several of the WSSN colleges also that have worked a lot on emergency loan programs and finding ways for that to not only alleviate an immediate need, but also be a starting point for building some additional economic security for students over time, so that what begins as a crisis really helps them get to stability, and then sticking with a program and being able to move on and become more economically secure. So again, if there are anyone that
I have a question for the group.
Great.
As we think about students in crisis, because like I said, you have this routine student flow, and you guys pretty much have this down. And you figured out bundling, especially through staffing. We talked about that on the last call, about how many of you have combined career coaching and financial coaching, or you figured out how to incorporate partners into your bundles. I'm wondering, for those students that you have in crisis, what is the crisis that brings them to your door? Like, what are students struggling with? And one of the reasons why I'm asking this is because as we think about, because one, that may be something that somebody else has with their students, and maybe you could offer some guidance. And then two, as we think about sustainability, which is our next webinar, we can build that in. So if you want to write in the chat box, again, like what are for your students in crisis, what's driving them to your door?
All right, we've got lots of shy folks on the line today, but we I think oh, let's see, we've got a few ideas here.
Transportation issues and power, electricity issues. Okay, so there's probably a need for some of that emergency cash assistance or connecting them to an agency that provides that assistance. And oh yeah, you guys are speaking up now. Transportation issues. We've heard of cars breaking down, and schools in Washington and Arkansas, we know, have you know, in addition to providing transportation dollars when they can for public transportation, they're also providing, using their auto repair students to be able to help fix those cars. Rental assistance, so connecting with partners that can help with rent assistance and paying the rent, or in cases of homelessness, I'll say that connecting people to stable and safe housing, mental health issues, students in abusive situations. I'm wondering for people with health issues just in general, but mental health issues, how many of you happen to have a clinic on campus that you could start to incorporate in your ISD strategy and helping them have a better understanding of the student flows, and even being able to possibly provide some of the intake after they're stabilized, or do some of the benefit screening, you know, after they start to see students stabilize. And then financial needs, again, related to housing and childcare issues. Oh, so, and someone's saying you can use workforce grants for wraparound and emergency funds. Loyal, do you want to maybe type in a little bit more about that? I know it's a lot of typing, but I think that everybody would benefit from that.
I think that the idea of using workforce grants is a great example of how your sequence of services and bundles doesn't have to be only what's happening on your campus, and that being able to leverage other funds that you might have, and knowing what's in those grants, right? Because it may be that there are services that you can tap into for students who are eligible to really help make some of these things more possible as far as the integrating and providing additional services. I think another piece, thinking about student flow and student in crisis, Jenna mentioned the 3 H's of hunger, homelessness, and health. And I think if any one of those 3 is the entry point, or where the student's coming to you, thinking through how if there is a need to address all 3, and using that kind of as a starting point might be a way to think about what a crisis response might be in order to help a student get stable and back on track.
So I just say to let you guys know, we're Loyal's typing in right now more about the workforce grants for wraparound services and emergency funds. So we're going to report that out to you in a little bit.
But while that's happening, are there others, as you're thinking, how you gave us a list of some of the common challenges that students face, thinking through how you've responded to those would be great to share.
So while you're typing that in, because I'm very excited to hear what you guys are going to share, I'm going to read out Loyal's response. She said, students who are eligible for workforce grants can request emergency funding even if they have already received financial aid or third party paying for their quarter. The workforce grants can provide additional funds. And I know through WIOA, there's also additional funding if a student happens to be eligible for WIOA, maybe comes to you from a American Job Center, that they can, there's money for financial literacy and financial coaching. And so there may be a way to partner differently to provide those services that could be helpful, that can free up money at your institution to be used differently to help students in crisis.
All right. Well, thank you for listening in with us today. I will say that as we look forward to the next webinar, the final one in the series is going to be about sustainability and how you both make the case for continuing and making integrated services delivery part of how your institution works, and thinking through some of the ways that you might expand and support those services in the long run. And in light of that, I'd encourage you that even if you, you've got your programming worked out and things are a well-oiled machine, I would encourage you to try to draw your student flow again, or revisit that initial diagram that you made and think through, have you thought about all the different places that a student might enter, and if they do go in a different door, are they going to get the same information, and have you got things lined up in such a way that they are reinforcing and build on one another instead of maybe in competition or you know, the deep end before you get through the shallows. So as you think about what comes next and really building that into your institution's processes and policies, it will be helpful to have thought through and revisited what your student flow is, if it's changed as you've implemented, and think about how you might want to make some of those revisions and alterations in order to make it sustainable in the long run. So with that, I'll turn it back over to LaShondra and thank everyone for their participation today.
Thank you.
So actually, I'm just going to say thank you all for participating today. I don't have anything to add. Greatly appreciative that you were able to participate, and we look forward to talking with you at our next and last webinar as part of this webinar series. So thanks everybody, and have a great day. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.